She walked into our 10th anniversary dinner at Portland's most expensive restaurant with Stephen Green on her arm, introducing him as her business partner while wearing the dress I'd bought her for our honeymoon. The entire room of family and friends went silent as Michelle leaned into him, laughing at his whispered jokes like a teenager. When my brother asked where I was sitting, she casually pointed to the corner table, alone, and announced that Stephen would be taking my spot at the head table because he'd contributed so much to making this night special. I didn't cause a scene that night. I didn't beg or demand explanations. Instead, I quietly excused myself, drove to Emily's apartment, and asked my wife's sister a simple question. Want to help me throw the most unforgettable divorce party this city has seen? 6 months later, when Michelle received those papers, she learned what betrayal felt like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Daniel Thomas, and I used to believe that consistency was the foundation of a good marriage. For 10 years, I'd been the reliable husband, the one who remembered anniversaries, picked up Michelle's dry cleaning without being asked, and never missed a single one of her work events. I was a senior architect at Pinnacle Design Group, the kind of guy who wore pressed shirts to casual dinners and actually enjoyed planning romantic surprises. At 34, I thought I had life figured out. I owned a beautiful craftsman house in Portland's Hawthorne district, drove a sensible but well-maintained Audi, and had built what everyone called a picture-perfect marriage with my college sweetheart. I was the type of man who still opened car doors for his wife, who remembered how she liked her coffee, and who genuinely believed that small gestures of love could sustain a relationship through anything. Michelle used to tease me about being chronically responsible. She'd laugh when I'd arrive at parties exactly on time, when I'd plan our vacations 6 months in advance, when I'd surprise her with flowers on random Tuesdays just because. "You're like a golden retriever," she'd say, ruffling my hair affectionately. Loyal, dependable, and impossible not to love. I'd taken pride in that description. In a world full of unreliable men, I was the exception. I was the husband other wives pointed to when they complained about their own partners. I was living proof that good guys could finish first, that treating your wife like a queen would earn you a lifetime of happiness in return. That night, standing in front of my bathroom mirror adjusting my tie for our 10th anniversary dinner, I still believed every word of it. I arrived at the Sterling Heights 15 minutes early, just like I always did for important occasions. The restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Portland's glittering skyline, and I'd specifically requested the private dining room where Michelle and I had celebrated our engagement 10 years ago. Tonight was supposed to be perfect, our 10th wedding anniversary surrounded by the people who mattered most to us. I'd spent weeks planning every detail. The champagne was Michelle's favorite vintage, the flowers were white roses like her wedding bouquet, and I'd even hired the string quartet that played at our reception. 43 guests, our closest family and friends, were already seated around elegantly set tables, chatting and laughing as they waited for the guests of honor to arrive. My brother Jake caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass with a grin. "Danny, you really outdid yourself this time," he called out. "Michelle's going to lose her mind when she sees all this." I checked my watch, 7:15. Michelle was running late, which wasn't unusual for her, but tonight felt different. She'd been distant all week, constantly on her phone, taking calls in the other room. When I'd asked about her day at the marketing firm, she'd give me vague responses about big projects and difficult clients. I'd chalked it up to work stress. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. "Almost there. Can't wait to see the surprise." 7:30, the dining room doors opened, and my heart stopped. Michelle walked in wearing the black silk dress I'd bought her for our honeymoon in Italy, the one she claimed was too fancy to wear anywhere in Portland. Her hair was styled in elegant waves, her makeup flawless, and she was glowing with the kind of radiant confidence that had first attracted me to her in college. But she wasn't alone. Stephen Green, tall and broad-shouldered with perfectly styled, dark hair, walked beside her with his hand placed possessively on the small of her back. I recognized him immediately. He'd been mentioned countless times over the past few months as Michelle's new business partner at the marketing firm, the same Stephen she'd had dinner meetings with, the same Stephen who'd been texting her at all hours, the same Stephen she claimed was just a colleague." The entire room fell silent. 43 conversations stopped mid-sentence as every head turned toward the entrance. My Aunt Patricia dropped her fork with a clatter that echoed through the sudden quiet. "Everyone," Michelle announced with a brilliant smile, her voice carrying that confident tone she used for client presentations. "I'd like you all to meet Stephen Green, my business partner and, well, the man who's been helping me plan something very special." Stephen stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone who owned every room he entered. His handshake was firm when he greeted my parents, his smile charming when he kissed my sister's cheek. He worked the room like a politician, introducing himself to my family and friends as if this were his party, his celebration, his life. My brother Jake looked confused, glancing between Stephen and me. "Hey, Michelle?" he called out uncertainly. "Where should Danny sit? We saved the head table for you two." Michelle's laugh was bright and airy, completely unbothered by the question that had just shattered my world. "Oh, Danny can sit wherever he's comfortable," she said, waving her hand dismissively toward the corner table I designated for late arrivals. "Stephen will be sitting with me at the head table. After all, he's contributed so much to making this evening special." The words hit me like physical blows. Danny can sit wherever he's comfortable. At my own anniversary dinner. The head table I'd carefully arranged for the two of us now had a stranger in my place, while I was being relegated to the corner like an unwanted guest at my own celebration. Watched as Stephen pulled out Michelle's chair, my wife's chair, and helped her sit down. The same chair where I'd planned to give my speech about 10 years of marriage, 10 years of building a life together, 10 years of love and partnership. Instead, Stephen was leaning close to her ear, whispering something that made her laugh and touch his arm intimately. The string quartet, oblivious to the family drama unfolding, began playing "The Way You Look Tonight," the song from our first dance. Michelle's eyes found mine across the room for just a moment, and I saw something there I'd never seen before. Indifference. Not guilt, not regret, not even anger. Just complete, devastating indifference. My chest tightened as the reality crashed over me. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, calculated. She'd brought another man to our anniversary dinner, displaced me from my own celebration, and was now playing the perfect hostess while I sat alone at a corner table, like a forgotten afterthought. "Danny?" My sister Linda appeared beside me, her face creased with concern. "What's going on? Who is that guy?" I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing, my hands were shaking, and every eye in the room was either staring at me with pity or deliberately looking away to spare me further embarrassment. The humiliation was suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of the rage or desperation I expected to feel, a strange calm settled over me. 10 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. Not with a fight or even a conversation, but with a public execution disguised as a celebration. I stood up slowly, straightened my tie, and walked calmly to the head table where my wife was laughing at another one of Stephen's whispered jokes. "Michelle," I said quietly, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. "I need to step out for a moment. I'll leave you to enjoy the evening." She looked up at me with those indifferent eyes. "Of course, Danny. Take all the time you need." I nodded once, turned, and walked out of the Sterling Heights with as much dignity as I could muster. Behind me, the string quartet continued playing our song while my wife celebrated our anniversary with another man. In the parking garage, sitting in my car with the engine off, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in months. Emily Taylor, Michelle's younger sister. The one person who'd always seen through Michelle's perfect facade. The one person who might understand what I was about to do. The phone rang twice before her familiar voice answered. "Daniel? Is everything okay?" "Emily," I said, my voice finally, steady for the first time all evening. "I need your help with something. Are you free tonight? Are you free tonight?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Emily Taylor in a quiet corner booth at Morrison's Diner, a 24-hour breakfast place that had become our unofficial meeting spot over the years. Emily had always been different from her older sister. Where Michelle was polished and calculating, Emily was genuine and intuitive. At 28, she worked as a trauma nurse at Portland General Hospital, which meant she'd seen enough human drama to recognize real crisis when it walked through her door. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You look surprisingly calm for someone whose wife just publicly humiliated him, Emily said, studying my face with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She'd arrived in scrubs, having finished a double shift just an hour earlier, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun. I honestly expected you to be, I don't know, punching walls or drunk dialing Michelle by now. I took a sip of my coffee, black, no sugar, the way I'd been drinking it since college, and considered her words. You know what's strange? I should be angry. I should be devastated. But instead, I feel clear. Like someone just turned on a light in a room I didn't even realize was dark.
Emily leaned forward, her expression serious. Daniel, what exactly happened tonight? Your text just said you needed to talk about Michelle. So I told her everything. The anniversary dinner I'd planned for months. The 43 guests who'd
witnessed my humiliation. The way Michelle had casually displaced me from my own celebration like I was an inconvenient afterthought. Emily's jaw tightened as I described Stephen Green taking my place at the head table, whispering intimately in my wife's ear while our wedding song played in the background. That calculating bitch, Emily muttered, then immediately covered her mouth. Sorry, I know she's your wife, but no, I said quietly. Don't apologize. You're right, and that's why I called you. Emily's eyebrows shot up. What do you mean? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. A contact card for Davidson & Associates, Portland's most respected divorce law firm. I made this call from the parking garage. I have an appointment with Margaret Davidson tomorrow morning at 9. The silence stretched between us as Emily processed what I'd just said. A couple in the next booth was arguing loudly about money, their voices creating a perfect soundtrack for my own domestic crisis. You're serious, Emily said finally. You're actually going to divorce her. Emily, tonight wasn't just infidelity. It was a public execution. She didn't just cheat on me. She humiliated me in front of everyone we know, on our anniversary, at a party I planned and paid for. That takes a level of calculated cruelty that goes beyond a simple affair. Emily nodded slowly, and I could see her nurse's instincts kicking in, the same calm professionalism she used when dealing with trauma patients. Okay, so you're divorcing Michelle. I get that. But why did you call me? I mean, I'm glad you did, but because I need your help with something that's going to sound completely insane. She laughed despite the circumstances. Daniel, after what you just told me, I'm pretty sure my definition of insane has been permanently altered. Try me. I leaned forward, lowering my voice even though the diner was mostly empty. I want to throw a divorce party, a big one. I want to invite everyone who was at tonight's dinner, plus everyone from our social circle who couldn't make it. I want it to be elegant, expensive, and absolutely unforgettable. Emily blinked at me. A divorce party. Think about it, I continued, warming to the idea that had been forming since I'd left the Sterling Heights. Michelle staged tonight's humiliation because she wanted everyone to see her with Stephen. She wanted to make a public statement about moving on, about upgrading from her boring, reliable husband to someone more exciting. Fine, but two can play that game. And you want me to be my date? Emily nearly choked on her coffee. Daniel, what the hell? Not romantically, I said quickly. Although I want everyone to think it might be. Emily, you're beautiful, you're successful, you're witty, and, most importantly, you're Michelle's sister. Can you imagine the look on her face when she realizes that while she was busy betraying me, I was building a connection with someone closer to home? Emily stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. This is revenge. This is justice, I corrected. Michelle wants to play games with public perception? She wants to humiliate me in front of our friends and family? Fine. But she's about to learn that the quiet, reliable husband she discarded so casually is capable of making moves she never saw coming. Daniel, Emily paused. Then a slow smile spread across her face. You know what? She deserves this. Michelle has been treating people like disposable props her entire life. Our parents, her friends, you. Everyone exists to serve her. Narrative. Maybe it's time someone flipped the script. So you'll help me? Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Oh, honey. I'll do more than help you. I'll make sure this divorce party becomes the most talked about event Portland has seen all year. Michelle thinks she's a master manipulator. She's about to get schooled by someone who learned at the same kitchen table she did. I felt a smile tugging at my lips for the first time since I'd walked into that restaurant tonight. Emily, there's something else you should know. The house, the cars, our investment accounts. Everything's in both our names, which means the divorce is going to get complicated. But I've been thinking about this for the past hour, and I realized something. Michelle made a crucial mistake tonight. What's that? She showed her hand too early. She's so confident that I'll just quietly accept this humiliation and slink away that she's not even trying to hide the affair anymore. Stephen Green was all over her in front of 43 witnesses, including both our families. She's handed me everything I need to prove adultery in divorce court. Emily's smile turned predatory. And in Oregon, adultery affects property division. Exactly. My reliable, boring attention to detail is about to pay off in ways Michelle never imagined. I've got photos of every asset, copies of every financial document, and now I've got a room full of witnesses who saw her flaunting her affair at our anniversary dinner. So while she's busy playing house with Stephen Green, I'll be dismantling the life she thought she could just walk away from. I raised my coffee cup in a mock toast to Michelle Davis, who's about to discover that the golden retriever she discarded has grown some very sharp teeth. Emily clinked her mug against mine. This is going to be fun. As we sat there planning what would become the most memorable divorce party in Portland's social history, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. The Daniel Thomas who'd walked into the Sterling Heights tonight, eager to please, desperate to maintain peace, willing to accept crumbs of affection. That man was gone. In his place sat someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone who understood that sometimes the most devastating revenge comes not from losing your temper, but from keeping your cool and playing a longer game. Michelle had wanted to make a statement tonight. Fine. Now it was my turn. The next morning, sitting in Margaret Davidson's law office overlooking Pioneer Courthouse Square, I found myself telling the story of how Michelle and I met. It felt surreal, describing the beginning of our love story to a woman whose job was to help me end it. We were both at the University of Oregon, I explained, watching Margaret take notes on her legal pad. I was in my final year of architecture school. She was finishing her marketing degree. We met at a campus coffee shop, Moonlight Cafe, during finals week in December 2014. I could still picture that moment with perfect clarity. Michelle had been sitting alone at a corner table, surrounded by textbooks and empty coffee cups, her blonde hair falling across her face as she studied. She was wearing a cream sweater that made her look soft and approachable, so different from the calculated woman who'd humiliated me last night. When she'd looked up and caught me staring, her smile had been genuine, warm, almost shy. I was immediately struck by how beautiful she was, I continued, but also how focused. While other students were stressed and frantic, Michelle seemed completely in control. She had color-coded notes, a detailed study schedule, and this air of confidence that I found magnetic. Margaret looked up from her notepad. What attracted her to you? I'd asked myself that question 1,000 times over the years. I think I represented stability. Michelle's family background was complicated. Her father left when she and Emily were young, and her mother struggled with depression and financial problems. Michelle basically raised Emily while putting herself through school. I came from a stable, middle-class family. 2 parents still married, steady income, predictable life. I think I represented the security she'd never had. Those early months had been intoxicating. Michelle had made me feel like the most important person in her world. She'd listen to my architectural theories with rapt attention, ask thoughtful questions about my projects, and make me feel like my dreams of designing sustainable buildings were not just career goals, but noble pursuits. In return, I'd provided the emotional and financial stability she craved. We complemented each other perfectly, I told Margaret. I was the steady foundation, she was the dynamic energy. I planned, she executed, I built the framework, she filled it with life. After graduation, we'd moved to Portland together. I'd landed my position at Pinnacle Design Group, and Michelle had started at Cascade Marketing Solutions. We'd rented a small apartment in the Alberta Arts District, splitting expenses down the middle and saving every penny for our future. Those first 2 years living together had been some of the happiest of my life. Michelle had this way of making ordinary moments feel special, I said, remembering weekend mornings when she'd dance around our tiny kitchen while making pancakes, or evenings when she'd curl up next to me on our secondhand couch, playing with my hair while I worked on freelance design projects. She made me feel like the luckiest man alive. We'd gotten engaged on a hiking trip to Crater Lake, exactly 3 years after we'd met. I'd carried the ring in my backpack for 6 miles, waiting for the perfect moment when we reached the rim and could see the impossible blue water stretching below us. Michelle had cried when I'd proposed. Actual tears of joy, not the calculated performances I'd grown used to in recent years. The wedding was everything Michelle had dreamed of, I continued. We spent months planning every detail. She insisted on real flowers, not silk ones. She wanted a string quartet, not a DJ. She said our wedding day would set the tone for our entire marriage, that if we started with excellence, excellence would follow. And for a while, it had. We'd bought the Craftsman House in Hawthorne, 2 years after the wedding, spending weekends refinishing hardwood floors and painting walls the exact shade of sage green Michelle had fallen in love with at a design showroom. I'd designed a custom kitchen island, and Michelle had spent hours choosing the perfect pendant lights to hang above it. We entertained constantly in those early years, I told Margaret. Michelle loved hosting dinner parties, and I loved watching her work a room. She was brilliant at bringing people together, making connections, creating experiences that our friends still talk about. Our home became the gathering place for our social circle. Margaret paused in her note-taking. When did things start to change? I'd been dreading that question, but I'd spent the sleepless night thinking about it. About 2 years ago, Michelle started getting restless. She'd complain that Portland was too small, that her job at Cascade wasn't challenging enough, that our social circle was too predictable. She started talking about bigger cities, better opportunities, more exciting possibilities. That's when she'd made the move to Meridian Marketing Group, a larger firm with national clients. The job came with longer hours, more travel, and significantly more money. It also came with Stephen Green. She changed after starting at Meridian, I said, my jaw tightening at the memory. She became more calculating, more image-conscious. She started caring about designer clothes, expensive restaurants, the right social connections. The woman, who used to be happy cooking dinner at home, suddenly needed to be seen at Portland's hottest new bistros. I'd tried to adapt, tried to become the husband she seemed to want. I'd bought better clothes, learned about wine, started suggesting weekends at luxury resorts instead of our usual camping trips. But nothing I did seemed to bridge the growing gap between us. The worst part is that I saw the signs and chose to ignore them, I admitted to Margaret. Michelle started working late multiple nights a week. She'd come home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. She'd get mysterious phone calls that she'd take in the other room. When I'd ask about her day, she'd give me vague responses about client dinners and strategy sessions. Margaret nodded sympathetically. Many spouses in your situation report similar experiences. The betrayed partner often senses something is wrong but hopes they're being paranoid. I thought I was being a supportive husband by not questioning her too closely. I thought I was showing trust and respect for her professional autonomy. I laughed bitterly. I was actually just making it easier for her to deceive me. The most painful realization was that while I'd been working to save our marriage, Michelle had been systematically dismantling it. While I'd been planning our anniversary celebration, she'd been planning her exit strategy. While I'd been choosing flowers and hiring musicians to honor our 10 years together, she'd been preparing to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. Mr. Thomas, Margaret said gently, I want you to understand something. What happened to you last night wasn't just adultery, it was emotional abuse. The public humiliation, the calculated timing, the involvement of your social circle. These were deliberate choices designed to maximize your pain and her sense of power. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 10 years thinking I was in a loving marriage with a woman who'd simply grown apart from me. I was only beginning to understand that I'd actually been in an abusive relationship with a master manipulator who'd used my love and loyalty against me. That's why I need to make sure she doesn't get to rewrite this story, I said, my voice hardening with resolve. Michelle wants everyone to believe that I was the boring husband who couldn't keep his exciting wife interested. But the truth is that I was the faithful partner being systematically betrayed by someone who never intended to honor her vows. Margaret smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. "Mr. Thomas, I think we're going to get along just fine. Now, let's talk about how we're going to protect everything you've built." As we dove into the legal strategy that would ultimately reshape my life, I realized that understanding the foundation of my marriage, what I'd built, what I'd lost, and what I'd been blind to, wasn't just necessary for the divorce proceedings, it was essential for becoming the man I needed to be next. Looking back, I could pinpoint the exact moment when everything started unraveling, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It was 6 months ago, on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I'd come home from the office excited to share news about a major project Pinnacle had just landed, a sustainable housing development that would be the biggest commission of my career. I'd been dreaming about celebrating with Michelle, maybe opening that bottle of champagne we'd been saving from our Napa Valley trip. Instead, I found her pacing around our living room in a sleek black dress I'd never seen before, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror for the third time since I'd walked through the door. "You look amazing," I'd said, kissing her cheek. "Where are we going?" Michelle had barely glanced at me. "We're not going anywhere. I have a client dinner with the new senior partner at Meridian, Stephen Green. He's taking over the Morrison Industries account." The name Stephen Green had meant nothing to me then, just another colleague in Michelle's increasingly complex professional world. But I'd noticed how she'd said his name, with a subtle emphasis that suggested importance beyond business. "Rain check on celebration dinner then?" I'd asked, loosening my tie. "I have some great news about the Riverside project." "Daniel, I really need to focus right now," she'd replied, her tone sharp with irritation. "Can we talk about your work stuff later? This dinner is crucial for my career." That should have been my first real warning sign, not the client dinner itself, but Michelle's complete disinterest in celebrating my success. The woman I'd married would have insisted we postpone her dinner to toast my achievement. Michelle brushed past my news like it was an inconvenience. Over the following weeks, Stephen Green's name started appearing in our conversations with increasing frequency. "Stephen thinks we should expand our digital marketing strategy. Stephen knows this amazing wine bar downtown. Stephen went to Harvard Business School, you know." Each mention felt like a small knife twist, though I couldn't explain why. Michelle started working late multiple nights a week, always on projects involving Stephen's accounts. She'd come home energized in a way I hadn't seen in years, talking animatedly about innovative marketing strategies and breakthrough client presentations. The passion I remembered from our early relationship had returned, but it was no longer directed toward our life together. I'd tried to bridge the growing distance between us in the ways I'd always known how. I'd surprise her with flowers from Powell's Books Cafe, the spot where we'd had our first official date. I'd plan weekend trips to the Oregon coast, booking rooms at the same bed and breakfast where we'd spent our first anniversary. I'd cook elaborate dinners using recipes from the Italian cookbook she'd bought after our honeymoon, recreating meals from restaurants we'd visited in Tuscany. But Michelle seemed increasingly impatient with these gestures. "Daniel, you don't need to try so hard," she'd said one evening, barely touching the osso buco I'd spent 3 hours preparing. "We're not college kids anymore. We don't need to constantly prove our love with grand romantic gestures." Her words had stung, but I'd interpreted them as a sign that she wanted our relationship to mature, to move beyond the need for constant courtship. I'd convinced myself that her growing independence was healthy, that successful couples could maintain their individual passions while staying committed to each other. The phone calls had started shortly after that. Michelle would receive texts at dinner, during movies, even during the rare intimate moments we still shared. She'd glance at her phone with a barely suppressed smile, then excuse herself to take calls in our home office with the door closed. When I'd asked about the late-night calls, she'd explained that Stephen worked with international clients and sometimes needed to coordinate with teams in different time zones. "It's the price of working with high-level accounts," she'd said, her tone suggesting I wouldn't understand the complexities of her professional world. "Stephen has to be available to clients around the clock, and as his account partner, so do I." I'd accepted this explanation because I'd wanted to believe it. The alternative, that my wife was having emotional or physical relationships with another man, seemed impossible. Michelle was the woman who'd cried at our wedding, who'd spent hours planning our future over coffee on Sunday mornings, who'd once told me that I was the only man she'd ever truly trusted. But the evidence kept mounting. Michelle started buying new clothes, designer pieces that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. She'd get her hair done at an expensive salon in downtown Portland instead of the neighborhood place she'd been going to for years. She'd wear perfume I didn't recognize, subtle and sophisticated scents that replaced the jasmine fragrance she'd worn since college. When I'd complimented her new look, she'd seemed almost guilty. Stephen mentioned that the clients we're courting expect a certain level of polish, she'd explained. Image matters in high-stakes marketing. I'm basically representing the company now. 3 months ago, Michelle had started taking weekend trips for client development conferences. She'd returned from these trips glowing with excitement, full of stories about innovative marketing techniques and networking opportunities. But when I'd asked to see photos or materials from these conferences, she'd become evasive. "They make us sign confidentiality agreements," she'd said. "Some of these strategies are proprietary. I can't even tell you which companies were represented." I'd begun to notice that these mysterious conferences always seemed to coincide with Stephen's own absences from the office. When I'd mentioned this observation, Michelle had exploded with an anger that seemed disproportionate to my innocent question. "Are you seriously going to start questioning my professional activities?" she demanded. "Do I interrogate you about every project meeting and business lunch? This is exactly the kind of insecurity that kills marriages, Daniel." Her accusation had hit its target perfectly. I'd backed down, apologizing for being suspicious and promising to be more supportive of her career growth. But privately, I'd started paying closer attention to the patterns of her absences and the changes in her behavior. 2 months ago, Michelle had stopped wearing her wedding ring during the week, claiming that jewelry interfered with her tablet when she was giving client presentations. She'd only put it back on for social events where our mutual friends would be present. I'd started wearing mine more consciously, as if the weight of both our commitments could somehow compensate for her absence. The final warning sign had come 3 weeks before our anniversary dinner. I'd been working late at the office trying to finish designs for the sustainable housing project when I decided to surprise Michelle by picking her up from work. I'd stopped at her favorite bakery and bought lavender macarons, planning to suggest we grab dinner at the new farm-to-table restaurant she'd been wanting to try. But when I'd arrived at Meridian Marketing Group's offices, the security guard had told me that Michelle had left hours earlier with a male colleague. I'd called her cell phone and gotten voicemail. When she'd finally returned my call at 11 that night, she'd claimed she'd been at a last-minute client crisis meeting that had run long, and her phone had died. "I'm sorry I missed your call," she'd said, her voice tired but somehow also satisfied. But Stephen really saved the day with the Morrison Industries presentation. We might have lost $1 million account if he hadn't stayed late to help me fix the strategy. That night, lying in bed beside Michelle while she slept peacefully, I'd finally admitted to myself what I'd been trying to ignore for months. My wife was having an affair. The late nights, the mysterious trips, the new clothes, the phone calls, the growing emotional distance. It all pointed to one devastating conclusion. But even then, even with the evidence overwhelming, I'd chosen hope over reality. I'd decided that planning the perfect anniversary celebration could remind Michelle of what we'd built together, could rekindle the love that had brought us this far. I'd convinced myself that if I could just create the right moment, the right gesture, I could win back the woman I'd married. Instead, I'd handed Michelle the perfect stage for my public humiliation. As I sat in Margaret Davidson's office the morning after the anniversary dinner, recounting these months of willful blindness, I realized that the most painful part wasn't Michelle's betrayal. It was recognizing how thoroughly I'd betrayed myself. Sitting at that corner table in the Sterling Heights, watching my wife celebrate our 10th anniversary with another man, I experienced what I can only describe as an out-of-body sensation. It was as if I were watching someone else's life implode in slow motion, observing from a distance as everything I'd believed about love, marriage, and my own worth crumbled into dust. The string quartet continued playing our wedding songs, while Michelle and Stephen shared intimate conversations at the head table. Every few minutes she would throw back her head and laugh at something he whispered in her ear. The same melodic laugh that had first captivated me at Moonlight Cafe 11 years ago. Now it felt like fingernails on a chalkboard, each note a reminder of how completely I'd been played. My sister Linda had tried to sit with me, but I'd quietly asked her to return to her assigned table. I needed to experience this humiliation fully, to understand exactly what Michelle had orchestrated. This wasn't a spontaneous moment of poor judgment. This was a carefully planned public execution. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michelle's voice suddenly rang out over the ambient conversation. She was standing at the head table, champagne glass raised, commanding the attention of all 43 guests. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate this very special milestone." The room fell silent as every face turned toward her. Stephen remained seated beside her, his hand resting possessively on her lower back, a subtle but unmistakable claim of ownership. 10 years ago, Daniel and I made promises to each other, Michelle continued, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of her marketing presentations. "We promised to love, honor, and cherish each other through all of life's changes. Tonight, I want to honor those promises by being completely honest with all of you about where life has led us." My blood turned to ice. She wasn't just flaunting her affair, she was about to make a speech about it. At our anniversary dinner, in front of our families. "Change is the only constant in life," Michelle said, her eyes finding mine across the room. "People grow, evolve, discover new parts of themselves they never knew existed. Sometimes that growth brings couples closer together. Sometimes it reveals that they've grown in different directions." My mother covered her mouth with her hand, clearly realizing where this speech was heading. Jake started to stand up, but my father placed a restraining hand on his arm. Everyone seemed frozen, unable to look away from the train wreck unfolding in front of them. "Daniel is a good man," Michelle continued, her tone taking on the patronizing quality she used when explaining complex marketing concepts to junior colleagues. "He's reliable, consistent, and devoted. For many years, those qualities were exactly what I needed. But life has shown me that there's a difference between being safe and being truly alive." Stephen smiled up at her, his expression radiating satisfaction. This was clearly a performance they'd planned together, a public declaration designed to justify their affair while simultaneously destroying any sympathy I might receive. "I've discovered what it means to be with someone who challenges me intellectually, who matches my ambition, who sees the woman I'm becoming rather than clinging to who I used to be." Michelle's gaze shifted to Stephen, and the love in her eyes, real, genuine emotion that I hadn't seen directed at me in months, hit me like a physical blow. "So tonight, instead of celebrating the past, I want to celebrate new beginnings. Stephen, would you stand up?" Stephen rose gracefully, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his confident smile suggesting he'd done this before. He raised his own champagne glass as Michelle continued her speech. "This is Stephen Green, my partner in every sense of the word. Professional, personal, and in all the ways that matter for building a real future together. I know this might come as a surprise to some of you, but sometimes life gives us exactly what we need at exactly the right moment." The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel 43 pairs of eyes shifting between Michelle, Stephen, and me, trying to process the social catastrophe they were witnessing. My Uncle Robert looked like he was having a stroke. Michelle's own mother sat with her mouth hanging open, clearly as blindsided as everyone else. "To new chapters," Michelle said, raising her glass higher. "To having the courage to pursue happiness wherever it leads. And to all of you for being here to witness this important moment in our lives." She and Stephen touched glasses and drank, while the rest of the room sat in stunned silence. Not a single other person raised their glass. The string quartet had stopped playing mid-song, unsure whether to continue or flee. That's when my brother Jake finally stood up. "Michelle, what the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded, his voice shaking with rage. "This is your anniversary dinner. Daniel planned this entire evening to celebrate your marriage." Michelle's expression didn't change. "Jake, I understand this is uncomfortable, but adults sometimes have to make difficult decisions. Daniel and I have grown apart over the past year. Rather than pretend otherwise, I chose to be honest about where my heart really lies. Grown apart? My sister Linda was on her feet now too, her nurse's training unable to suppress her protective instincts. Michelle, you're publicly humiliating your husband at a party he organized and paid for. This isn't honesty. This is cruelty. I'm sorry you see it that way, Michelle replied coolly. But I refuse to live a lie for the sake of other people's comfort. Daniel deserves to be with someone who can love him the way he needs to be loved. I'm not that person anymore. Stephen finally spoke, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of people. I know this situation is unusual, but Michelle and I have found something real together. We didn't plan for this to happen, but when you meet your soulmate, you have to follow your heart. The word soulmate landed like a slap. In 10 years of marriage, Michelle had never once used that term to describe our relationship. Now she was claiming to have found her soulmate while still legally married to me at our anniversary dinner, in front of everyone we knew. My Aunt Patricia stood up abruptly. "This is disgusting," she announced to the room. "Charles, we're leaving." Other family members began gathering their things, clearly uncomfortable participating in whatever this had become. Michelle watched our guests filing out with complete composure, as if their departure had been expected, even desired. She wanted witnesses to her declaration, but she didn't need their approval or support. As the room emptied, I remained seated at my corner table, watching the woman I'd loved for 11 years dismantle our entire shared history with the efficiency of a demolition crew. She wasn't just ending our marriage, she was rewriting our entire story, transforming herself from unfaithful wife to liberated woman who'd finally found true love. When only a handful of people remained, Michelle finally approached my table. Stephen stayed behind, but I could feel his eyes on us, monitoring the interaction like a predator, ensuring his territory was secure. "Daniel," Michelle said softly, her tone now gentle and almost pitying. "I know this isn't how you wanted tonight to go, but I hope someday you'll understand that this was the kindest way to handle the situation." I looked up at her, this woman I'd shared a bed with for 10 years, whose coffee preferences I knew by heart, whose dreams I'd supported and whose fears I'd soothed. She was looking at me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was an obligation she'd finally been freed from. "Kindest?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "A clean break is better than months of pretending and false hope," she said. "You're a good man, Daniel. You deserve someone who can appreciate what you have to offer. That's just not me anymore." She turned to leave, then paused. "I'll send Emily to get my things from the house this week. I think it's better if we don't see each other for a while." And then she was gone, walking back to Stephen's side, where she belonged now. They left together, her hand in his, while I sat alone in the ruins of our anniversary celebration. The devastating realization wasn't just that my marriage was over. It was that according to Michelle's version of events, it had never really existed at all. I'd been living in a fantasy while she'd been merely settling until something better came along. But as I sat there in that empty dining room, surrounded by abandoned champagne glasses and wilted flowers, something unexpected began to crystallize inside me. Michelle had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd publicly declared that I wasn't enough for her, that Stephen Green was superior in every way that mattered. Fine. Now I knew exactly what I was fighting for, and more importantly, I knew exactly what I was fighting against. The drive home from the Sterling Heights that night was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I kept expecting to feel something. Rage, heartbreak, the desperate urge to call Michelle and beg her to reconsider. Instead, I felt eerily calm, as if the public destruction of my marriage had somehow freed me from the exhausting work of trying to save it. When I pulled into our driveway, my driveway now, I supposed, I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the craftsman house Michelle and I had spent 5 years renovating together, the sage green paint we'd chosen for the exterior trim, the custom mailbox I'd designed to match the architectural details, the garden beds where Michelle had planted lavender and rosemary. All of it suddenly looked different, like evidence of a life I'd been living alone without realizing it. I walked through the front door and felt the weight of the silence. No Michelle rushing to greet me with questions about the evening. No sounds from the kitchen where she might be making late-night tea. No warm lights left on to welcome me home. The house felt exactly the same as it had every night for the past 6 months when Michelle had been working late. I'd been living alone for half a year. I just hadn't admitted it to myself. Instead of wallowing in self-pity or reaching for the bottle of scotch in our kitchen cabinet, I did something that would have surprised the old Daniel Thomas. I got to work. I pulled out my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember from the evening. Every witness who'd been present, every word Michelle had said in her speech, every detail about Stephen Green's behavior and their obvious intimacy. If this was going to be a war, I needed ammunition, and Michelle had just handed me enough evidence to destroy her in divorce court. At 2 a.m., I was still awake, creating spreadsheets of our joint assets, photographing important documents, and making lists of every financial account, investment, and piece of property we'd accumulated during our marriage. The methodical work felt therapeutic, transforming my emotional devastation into concrete action items. When my phone buzzed with a text from Michelle at 2:30 a.m., I almost ignored it, but curiosity won out. "Daniel, I hope you understand that tonight was necessary. I'll be staying at Stephen's place for now. Emily will come by Thursday to get my clothes and personal items. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the message for a long time, amazed by its casual tone. She'd just publicly humiliated me in front of our entire social circle, and now she was texting logistics like we were coordinating a business transaction. The Michelle I'd married would have been sobbing with guilt, desperate to explain, begging for forgiveness, even if she didn't deserve it. This Michelle was a stranger. I typed back a single word: "Fine." Then I blocked her number. Thursday morning, I took a personal day from work and spent it making phone calls that would reshape my life. First, I contacted my bank and removed Michelle's access to our joint checking account, transferring half the funds to a new account in my name only. Margaret Davidson had advised me to secure my assets immediately, and I was following her instructions to the letter. Next, I called our credit card companies and canceled all shared accounts. Then I contacted our insurance providers, mortgage company, and investment advisor to inform them that I was filing for divorce and wanted all correspondence directed exclusively to me. By noon, I'd effectively severed every financial connection between Michelle and myself that didn't require court approval. If she thought she could waltz back into my life whenever convenient, she was about to learn otherwise. Emily arrived at 3 p.m. as scheduled, looking embarrassed and carrying empty boxes. "Daniel, I'm so sorry about what happened Tuesday night," she said immediately. "What Michelle did was unforgivable. Don't apologize for your sister," I told her, helping carry boxes inside. "You didn't choose her behavior." Emily followed me upstairs to the master bedroom, where I'd already packed most of Michelle's clothes and personal items. I'd been thorough, but not vindictive. Every piece of jewelry I'd given her, every designer handbag she'd bought with client dinner money, every photograph of her with Stephen that she thought I hadn't seen. "You found the photos?" Emily asked, noticing the stack of printed pictures I'd discovered hidden in Michelle's desk drawer. "Apparently your sister has been documenting her affair for months," I said, showing Emily images of Michelle and Stephen at restaurants I couldn't afford. Weekend trips I'd been told were work conferences, intimate moments that proved their relationship had been going on far longer than she'd admitted. Emily shook her head in disgust. "Danny, I need you to know something. Michelle called me yesterday, trying to get me to convince you to make this divorce amicable. She wants to avoid a messy court battle." "What did you tell her?" "What did you tell her?" "I told her that anyone who humiliates their spouse at their own anniversary dinner doesn't get to dictate the terms of the aftermath." Emily's green eyes flashed with anger. "She actually had the nerve to suggest that you were being dramatic about Tuesday night." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Dramatic? She stages a public performance designed to destroy my reputation and my emotional well-being, and I'm being dramatic." "Danny," Emily said carefully, "I know this is going to sound crazy given everything that's happened, but are you sure you want to go through with the divorce party idea? I mean, I'm absolutely willing to help you, but once we do this, there's no going back. Michelle will never forgive either of us." I looked around. The master bedroom that Michelle and I had shared for 5 years. The custom built-in shelves I designed to hold her book collection. The reading nook by the window where she used to curl up on Sunday mornings. The walk-in closet we'd expanded to accommodate her growing wardrobe of professional clothes. Everything in this room told the story of a woman I'd loved completely. A woman who'd apparently been plotting her exit while I was building us a life. "Emily," I said, my voice steady with new resolve. "I don't want Michelle's forgiveness. I want her to understand exactly what it feels like to be publicly humiliated by someone you trusted. I want her to experience the same shock and devastation she put me through Tuesday night." Emily studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but if we're doing this, we're doing it right. No half measures, no second thoughts."
We make this divorce party so spectacular that it becomes the standard by which all revenge stories are measured. What did you have in mind? Emily's smile was sharp and determined. Leave that to me. I've been watching Michelle manipulate people
Our entire lives, and I've learned a few things about strategic social warfare. If she wants to play games with public perception, she picked the wrong family to mess with. As we finished packing Michelle's belongings, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Excitement about the future. Not the desperate hope that Michelle would come back. Not the fantasy that we could somehow repair our broken marriage, but genuine anticipation for what came next. Michelle had spent Tuesday night rewriting our love story, casting herself as the heroine who'd finally found true love, and me as the inadequate husband who'd been holding her back. Fine. But every story has multiple perspectives, and I was about to tell mine. The old Daniel Thomas would have quietly accepted this humiliation, would have tried to preserve his dignity through silence and restraint. He would have signed whatever papers Michelle's lawyer drew up, divided the assets fairly, and tried to maintain cordial relations for the sake of their mutual friends. But that Daniel Thomas had died Tuesday night at the Sterling Heights, killed by a woman who'd claimed to love him for 10 years. The man loading Michelle's boxes into Emily's car was someone new entirely, someone who was done being manipulated, someone who was ready to fight back. The first sign that Michelle wasn't going to let me control the narrative came Friday morning, when my phone started buzzing with calls from mutual friends who'd been at the anniversary dinner. I'd expected some of them to reach out eventually, but the volume and urgency of the calls suggested something more coordinated was happening. "Danny, it's Patricia." My aunt's voice sounded strained when I finally answered. "I just got off the phone with Michelle's mother, and she's telling a very different story about what happened Tuesday night. I was sitting in my office at Pinnacle, trying to focus on the sustainable housing project, but clearly the personal drama was following me to work." "What kind of different story?" "According to Linda Davis, you've been emotionally absent for months. She's saying Michelle tried repeatedly to address problems in your marriage, but you refused to go to counseling or work on your relationship. She's claiming that Michelle only found comfort with Stephen after you'd essentially abandoned the marriage." The audacity was breathtaking. Michelle had spent the week since our anniversary dinner, spinning a revisionist history where I was the neglectful husband who'd driven her into another man's arms. I could picture her on the phone with her mother, crying as she described how lonely and underappreciated she'd been. How Stephen had simply been a friend who'd helped her through a difficult time. "Patricia, you were there Tuesday night. You saw what she did." "I know what I saw, sweetheart, but Michelle's version is making the rounds, and she's a very convincing storyteller. Some people are starting to wonder if there's more to the story." Then what happened at dinner? After hanging up with my aunt, I called Emily immediately. "It's worse than we thought," Emily said, without preamble. "Michelle's gone full-scale damage control. She's calling everyone we know, painting herself as the victim of an emotionally distant marriage. She's even claiming that she brought Stephen to the anniversary dinner because you'd been so checked out that she needed moral support to get through the evening." "Moral support?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "She gave a speech about finding her soulmate. I know that, and you know that. But Michelle's betting that people will believe her version if she tells it loudly enough, and often enough. She's always been good at manipulating narratives." The second wave of pushback came that afternoon, when Stephen Green himself showed up at my office. I was reviewing architectural drawings when my assistant knocked and told me there was a gentleman asking to see me. Stephen walked in wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit and the same confident smile he'd worn while taking my place at the anniversary dinner. "Daniel," he said, extending his hand as if we were old friends meeting for lunch. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I thought it might be helpful if we talked man to man about this situation." I didn't shake his hand. "What situation would that be, Stephen?" His smile never wavered, but I caught a flash of irritation in his eyes. "Look, I know Tuesday night was awkward for everyone involved. Michelle feels terrible about how things played out. But sometimes life forces us into difficult positions. Life forced Michelle to humiliate me at our anniversary dinner? Michelle has been unhappy for a long time, Stephen said, settling into the chair across from my desk without invitation. She tried to talk to you about it, but you weren't hearing her. When two people grow apart, sometimes the kindest thing is to be honest about it rather than pretending everything's fine. I studied Stephen's face, recognizing the calculated charm that had probably served him well in business, and apparently in stealing other men's wives. He was here for a reason, and it wasn't to apologize. What do you want, Stephen? I want to make sure we can all move forward without unnecessary drama. Michelle's worried that you're planning something vindictive, and I told her that didn't sound like the reasonable man she'd described to me. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Stephen was here to gauge my intentions, and, if necessary, warn me off any plans that might interfere with his new relationship. I'm planning to file for divorce, I said evenly. Beyond that, I haven't decided anything. Good, because Michelle's been through enough emotional turmoil already. She doesn't need her ex-husband making her life more difficult than it has to be. Stephen stood up, smoothing his tie. I'm sure you understand that Michelle and I want to build our future without looking over our shoulders, wondering what you might do out of hurt feelings. After he left, I sat in my office feeling a familiar rage building in my chest. Stephen Green had just walked into my workplace to essentially threaten me into accepting my wife's betrayal quietly. The arrogance was staggering. He'd helped destroy my marriage and was now trying to manage the aftermath to protect his own interests. But the real blow came that evening, when my mother called. "Daniel, honey, I've been thinking about everything that happened this week," she said in the careful tone she used when delivering bad news. "Maybe you should consider what Michelle said about going to counseling. Marriage is hard work, and sometimes we don't see our own contributions to problems." "Mom?" She brought her boyfriend to our anniversary dinner. "I know it looked bad, sweetheart, but her mother says they're just friends who work together. Maybe Michelle was trying to show you that she needs more intellectual stimulation in her life, and you could work on providing that." The conversation continued for 20 excruciating minutes, with my own mother essentially suggesting that I should fight for a woman who'd publicly declared her love for another man. By the time I hung up, I understood the full scope of what Michelle had accomplished in just 3 days. She'd positioned herself as the long-suffering wife who'd finally found happiness, me as the emotionally negligent husband who'd driven her away, and Stephen as the supportive friend who'd simply been there during her time of need. Anyone who questioned this narrative was being told they didn't understand the complexity of modern relationships. When Emily arrived at my house that evening with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant, she took one look at my face and knew exactly what had happened. "Let me guess," she said, setting containers of pad thai on my kitchen island. "Michelle's been busy rewriting history, and now everyone thinks you're the villain in this story. Worse. Stephen Green showed up at my office to essentially threaten me into backing off quietly, and my own mother thinks I should try to win Michelle back." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she started laughing. Not the bitter laugh of someone who'd been defeated, but the genuine amusement of someone who just realized their opponent had made a crucial mistake. "Danny, do you know what Michelle just did? She showed us exactly how threatened she is by the idea of you fighting back. If she really believed her own narrative, that you were a terrible husband who deserved to be left, she wouldn't need to work this hard to control the story. But people are believing her. Some people are. For now. But Michelle's strategy has a fatal flaw." Emily pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages from friends and family members. She's overplaying her hand. The more she talks, the more inconsistencies people are starting to notice. And the harder she works to make you look bad, the more it raises questions about why she's trying so hard. I read through the messages. Subtle doubts about Michelle's timeline. Questions about why she'd needed to bring Stephen to the anniversary dinner if they were just friends. Concerns about the calculated nature of her public speech. Plus, Emily continued, "She just gave us something invaluable. Stephen's visit to your office proves that they're scared. They're worried about what you might do, which means they know they're vulnerable." "What kind of vulnerable?" Emily's smile was sharp, with possibility. "Think about it. Stephen's a senior partner at a major marketing firm. Michelle's building her career at the same company. Their entire professional reputation depends on being seen as ethical, trustworthy people. What happens to that reputation when everyone finds out they've been having an affair while Michelle was married to someone else? For the first time since Stephen had walked into my office, I felt my confidence returning. Michelle and Stephen thought they'd successfully reframed the situation, but their very desperation to control the narrative had revealed their weakness. They'd won the first round by surprising me with their public betrayal, but now I knew they were playing defense, which meant I could start playing offense. "Emily," I said, pulling out a notebook and pen, "I think it's time we started planning that divorce party." The call came on Monday morning while I was reviewing divorce papers in Margaret Davidson's office. My phone displayed an unknown Portland number, and under normal circumstances, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Mr. Thomas? This is Victoria Chen from Meridian Marketing Group. I worked with your wife on several accounts before recent events. Could we meet for coffee? I have some information I think you'd find interesting." I'd never heard Michelle mention anyone named Victoria Chen, which was unusual given how thoroughly she'd documented her professional relationships. "What kind of information?" "The kind that's better discussed in person," Victoria said carefully. "I'm aware of what happened at your anniversary dinner, and I think there are some things you should know about your wife's professional conduct over the past several months." An hour later, I was sitting across from Victoria Chen at a quiet coffee shop in the Pearl District, trying to reconcile this poised professional woman with my mental image of Michelle's colleagues. Victoria appeared to be in her early 40s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into an elegant chignon and the kind of understated confidence that suggested real authority. "I'm the Director of Client Relations at Meridian," Victoria began, "which means I oversee all major account relationships and ensure our staff maintains professional standards with clients and colleagues. I've been watching the situation between Michelle and Stephen develop for months, and frankly, it's been a nightmare from a business perspective." She pulled out a tablet and showed me what appeared to be an internal company calendar. "These are the client dinners and strategy sessions Michelle has been documenting in our system. I started tracking them when other employees began complaining about Michelle's frequent absences and Stephen's obvious favoritism toward her. The calendar showed a pattern that made my stomach clench. Nearly every evening, Michelle had told me she was working late. She'd been listed as attending events with Stephen, weekend conferences that coincided with Stephen's own travel, late-night strategy sessions that lasted well past normal business hours. "Mr. Thomas, I want you to understand something," Victoria continued. "Michelle is actually quite talented at her job. Under normal circumstances, she would be a valuable employee. But her relationship with Stephen has created serious problems within our company." "What kind of problems?" Victoria scrolled through what appeared to be internal emails. "Stephen has been assigning Michelle to all the high-profile accounts, bypassing senior employees with more experience. He's taken her on client trips that should have been offered to other staff members. Most damaging, he's shared confidential client information with her that she wasn't authorized to access." She showed me several email threads where other employees had complained about the obvious favoritism, the disruption to team dynamics, and concerns about the ethical implications of Stephen's relationship with Michelle. "3 of our best account managers have requested transfers to other departments specifically because of this situation," Victoria said. "The Morrison Industries account, the one Michelle claims she and Stephen saved together, was actually nearly lost because the client was uncomfortable with their obvious personal relationship during business meetings." I stared at the documentation, understanding the implications immediately. This could destroy both their careers. "It should destroy their careers," Victoria said firmly. "What they've been doing violates multiple company policies about workplace, relationships, professional conduct, and conflicts of interest. The only reason I haven't reported it to senior management is that Stephen is a partner, and Michelle has been very careful to document everything as if it were legitimate business. So why are you telling me this?" Victoria was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at me. "Because I was at your anniversary dinner, Mr. Thomas." I blinked in surprise. "You were?" "My husband works with your brother Jake at Nike. We were invited as friends of your family." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "I watched what Michelle did to you that night, and it was one of the cruelest things I've ever witnessed. But what made it worse was knowing exactly how calculated it was. She showed me another document on her tablet, a request Michelle had submitted to take personal time on the Tuesday of our anniversary dinner. Michelle requested leave for a family emergency that afternoon. She told the office she needed to support her husband through a difficult situation. 3 hours later, she was giving a speech about leaving you for another man. The documentation painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond personal betrayal. Michelle hadn't just been cheating, she'd been using company, resources and professional relationships to facilitate her affair while actively lying to both her employer and her husband. Victoria, why are you showing me this? What do you want? I want justice, she said simply. I've been in corporate marketing for 20 years, and I've seen plenty of workplace affairs. Most of them are messy, but ultimately personal matters. This is different. Michelle and Stephen have used their positions of authority to violate professional ethics, and they've done it in a way that's damaged other people's careers and reputations. Victoria leaned forward, her voice taking on a harder edge. But beyond the professional issues, what I witnessed at your anniversary dinner was emotional abuse. Michelle didn't just leave you. She staged a public humiliation designed to make you feel worthless while positioning herself as the victim who'd finally found true love. So what are you proposing? I'm proposing that we make sure there are real consequences for their actions. Victoria pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. I've documented every policy violation, every instance of professional misconduct, every use of company resources for personal gain. When you're ready, I can present this information to Meridian's senior partners and the Morrison Industries client who was made uncomfortable by their behavior. I picked up the business card, noting that Victoria's title was more senior than I'd initially realized. She wasn't just Director of Client Relations, she was Vice President of Client Relations, which meant she had significant influence within the company. There's something else, Victoria continued. Stephen has been telling people at the office that you're planning some kind of vindictive response to the divorce. He's positioned himself as the reasonable man who's trying to protect Michelle from her unstable ex-husband. He's even suggested that the company might need to increase security because of potential threats from you. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Stephen threatened me in my own office, but he was now spreading rumors at his workplace that I was potentially dangerous. That's why I'm here, Victoria said. Stephen Green thinks he can manipulate every narrative, control every story, and face no consequences for his actions. He's forgotten that there are people who care more about integrity than office politics. And you think you can stop him? Think you can stop him? Victoria's smile was sharp with professional confidence. Mr. Thomas, I didn't become Vice President of Client Relations by letting people get away with unethical behavior. Stephen made a crucial mistake when he assumed that everyone at Meridian would either support his relationship or be too intimidated to challenge it. She gathered her documents and stood up. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal or even particularly dramatic. I'm simply offering to ensure that Michelle and Stephen face appropriate professional consequences for their choices. Sometimes the most effective justice is just making sure people can't escape the natural results of their actions. What do you need from me? Permission to use your anniversary dinner as evidence of their relationship timeline. If they're going to claim their affair started after your marriage ended, they need to explain why they were displaying obvious intimacy at an event celebrating your 10-year wedding anniversary. I thought about Michelle's carefully crafted narrative, Stephen's threats, and the systematic way they'd both worked to control the story of their relationship. They'd counted on my silence, my desire to avoid drama, my tendency to absorb pain rather than inflict it. They'd miscalculated badly. Victoria, I said, extending my hand. I think this is the beginning of a very productive partnership. As we shook hands, I realized something profound had shifted in my understanding of the situation. I'd been thinking about Michelle's betrayal as a personal failure, a reflection of my inadequacy as a husband, but Victoria saw it clearly for what it was, a pattern of unethical behavior by two people who'd abused their professional positions and personal relationships to get what they wanted. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, I felt like I had a true ally, someone who understood exactly what Michelle and Stephen had done and had the professional authority to ensure they faced real consequences. The old Daniel Thomas would have been grateful for Victoria's offer, but ultimately too uncomfortable with confrontation to follow through. The new Daniel Thomas was already planning how to use every piece of evidence she'd provided. 3 days after my meeting with Victoria Chen, she called with news that changed everything I thought I understood about my marriage. "Daniel, I need you to come to my office immediately. I've found something that's going to be difficult to hear, but you need to see it before we proceed with any plans." Victoria's office at Meridian Marketing Group was on the 15th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. She'd arranged for us to meet after hours, when the building was mostly empty and we could speak without fear of being overheard. "I've been going through Stephen's electronic calendar and email records as part of my investigation into their professional misconduct," Victoria began, gesturing for me to sit across from her desk. "What I found goes far beyond workplace policy violations." She turned her computer monitor toward me, displaying what appeared to be a series of calendar entries dating back nearly 18 months. "Daniel, their affair didn't start 6 months ago like Michelle claimed. It began almost immediately after she started working at Meridian." I stared at the screen, watching Victoria scroll through months of documented meetings between Michelle and Stephen. Dinners, weekend trips, late-night strategy sessions, all occurring while I'd been planning romantic surprises and trying to strengthen our marriage. "But that's not the worst part," Victoria continued grimly. "Look at this." She opened an email thread from 14 months ago, shortly after Michelle had started at Meridian. The subject line read, "Strategy for Michelle Davis Integration." Stephen sent this to his personal assistant, requesting that she help him develop a comprehensive approach to bringing Michelle Davis into the inner circle of company leadership. But read the details. The email outlined a plan that made my blood run cold. Stephen had instructed his assistant to research Michelle's background, her marriage, her financial situation, and her potential vulnerabilities that could be leveraged for company loyalty. "He was targeting her from the beginning," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It gets worse." Victoria opened another document, what appeared to be notes from Stephen's private meetings with Michelle during her first months at the company. Stephen documented their conversations about her marriage, her feelings of being underappreciated, her desire for more excitement and recognition. I read through Stephen's clinical observations about my wife's emotional state, her complaints about our routine life, her susceptibility to flattery and attention. It was like reading a predator's hunting notes. Stephen Green didn't fall in love with Michelle, Victoria said flatly. He identified her as someone he could manipulate for both personal and professional gain. "Look at this timeline." She showed me a chronological breakdown that revealed the systematic nature of Stephen's approach. First, he'd assigned Michelle to high-profile projects that built her confidence and made her feel important. Then, he'd started taking her to expensive restaurants and exclusive events, always framed as business development. Gradually, he'd increased the personal attention, the compliments about her intelligence and potential, the suggestions that she deserved better than her current situation. Every step was calculated, Victoria continued. Stephen even documented which conversations made Michelle most receptive to his influence. He kept notes about when she seemed most frustrated with her home life, when she was most vulnerable to suggestions about her career potential. The final piece of evidence was a document that shattered my understanding of everything that had happened. Victoria opened a file labeled Exit Strategy Documentation, dated 3 months before our anniversary dinner. Stephen and Michelle started planning your public humiliation months in advance, Victoria said quietly. This document outlines their strategy for ending your marriage in a way that would maximize Michelle's social and professional standing while minimizing potential backlash. The document was chillingly thorough. It included analysis of which mutual friends would be most likely to support Michelle's narrative, how to time the revelation for maximum impact, and even specific talking points Michelle should use to justify her actions. The anniversary dinner had been chosen specifically because it would force me into a defensive position, while allowing Michelle to appear strong and decisive. They calculated that publicly declaring their relationship at your anniversary would make it impossible for you to fight back without looking vindictive, Victoria explained. They assumed you'd be too shocked and humiliated to respond effectively, and that by the time you recovered, their version of events would already be accepted as truth. I stared at the document, reading phrases like neutralize potential negative reactions and establish narrative control through strategic timing. My marriage hadn't ended because Michelle fell out of love with me, or even because she'd been swept away by passion for Stephen Green. It had ended because two calculating people had systematically destroyed it as part of a long-term strategy for their own advancement. "There's more," Victoria said gently. "I found correspondence between Stephen and Michelle about your financial assets, your professional connections, even your relationship with Emily. They've been planning how to maximize Michelle's position in the divorce while maintaining access to your social and professional network." She showed me emails where Michelle had detailed our joint investments, my earning potential, and my family relationships. Stephen had provided advice on how to position herself for the most favorable divorce settlement while maintaining relationships with people who could benefit her career. "Daniel, they didn't just plan to leave you. They planned to destroy you systematically while stealing everything you'd built together." The most devastating revelation came in an email Michelle had sent to Stephen 2 weeks before our anniversary. "Dinner. Danny's been so sweet lately, planning something special for our anniversary. He has no idea what's coming. I almost feel bad about how much this is going to hurt him, but you're right that we need to establish clear boundaries. The romantic gesture will actually make it easier to justify my decision. People will see that he tried, but I'd already moved on." I read that email 3 times before the full cruelty of it sank in. Michelle had known about my anniversary plans, had watched me work for weeks to create a perfect celebration of our marriage, and had used my love against me as part of their strategy. "Victoria," I said finally, "this isn't just adultery or even emotional abuse. This is psychological warfare." "That's exactly what it is," she agreed. "Stephen Green is a master manipulator who identified your wife as both a target and a weapon he could use against you. And Michelle chose to be complicit in destroying a man who loved her completely." Victoria showed me one final document. A timeline Stephen had created tracking my emotional state over the past year, noting when I seemed most confused by Michelle's distance, when I'd tried hardest to reconnect with her, when I'd been most vulnerable to their manipulation. "They've been watching you, studying you, using your own love and commitment against you," Victoria said. "Every romantic gesture you made, every attempt to save your marriage, every moment of confusion when Michelle pulled away, they documented it all and used it to refine their strategy. I sat in stunned silence, processing the scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't a marriage that had fallen apart, or even a wife who'd been seduced by another man. This was a systematic psychological assault designed to extract maximum value from my devotion while destroying my ability to fight back. "Daniel," Victoria said carefully, "I need you to understand something crucial. You didn't lose Michelle because you weren't enough. You lost her because you were too much, too trusting, too loyal, too committed to someone who was studying your weaknesses and using them against you." The revelation reframed everything. My months of confusion, the feeling that I was somehow failing as a husband, the desperate attempts to win back someone who was already gone. All of it had been manufactured by 2 people who'd turned my love into a weapon against me. But with the devastation came something unexpected: clarity. For the first time in over a year, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Not a failed marriage or romantic competition, but calculated abuse by people who'd systematically exploited my trust. "Victoria," I said, my voice steady with new resolve, "I need copies of everything you've shown me. And then I need you to help me plan something that Stephen Green and Michelle Davis will never see coming. Because they'd made one crucial mistake in all their careful planning. They'd assumed I would remain the same trusting, loyal man they'd been manipulating. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The confrontation I'd been planning for. Weeks happened by accident on a Thursday evening at Whole Foods on Fremont Street. I was picking up ingredients for dinner when I saw them together in the wine section. Michelle and Stephen, shopping like a normal couple, her hand resting casually on his arm as they debated between Pinot Noir and Cabernet Sauvignon. For a moment, I considered leaving quietly. The old Daniel Thomas would have avoided the encounter, would have slipped away to prevent an uncomfortable scene. But as I watched Stephen guide Michelle toward the checkout line with proprietary confidence, something hardened inside me. I was done running from these people. "Michelle!" I called out, my voice carrying across the store with calm authority. She turned, and I saw the exact moment she recognized me. Her face went through a rapid succession of expressions: surprise, guilt, defiance, and finally, calculated composure. Stephen's hand immediately moved to the small of her back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Daniel," Michelle said carefully, as if she were greeting a potentially unstable acquaintance. "This is unexpected, is it?" I walked over to them, noting how Stephen positioned himself slightly in front of Michelle, as if shielding her from potential threat. "I've been hoping we could have a conversation, all three of us." Stephen's smile was perfectly calibrated, concerned but unthreatening, the expression of a reasonable man dealing with an unpredictable situation. "Daniel, I don't think this is the right time or place." "Actually, Stephen, I think this is perfect," I interrupted. "Public, neutral territory. No chance of anyone misunderstanding what gets said." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved Victoria's documentation. Michelle's eyes immediately fixed on the screen, and I watched her face pale as she recognized what she was seeing. "Interesting reading," I said conversationally. 18 months of planning, exit strategy documentation, timeline analysis of my emotional vulnerabilities. Really thorough work, both of you. Stephen's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you think you've found, but I found everything, Stephen. The emails, the calendar entries, the strategic planning sessions. I know about the Michelle Davis integration strategy. I know about the timeline you created tracking my reactions to her pulling away. I know you planned the anniversary dinner humiliation 3 months in advance." Michelle tried to interrupt. "Daniel, you're misunderstanding. Am I?" I showed her the screen displaying her own email about my anniversary plans. Quote, "Danny's been so sweet lately, planning something special for our anniversary. He has no idea what's coming. The romantic gesture will actually make it easier to justify my decision." Should I continue? The blood drained from Michelle's face completely. Stephen stepped closer to her, his protective stance becoming more pronounced. "Look, Daniel," Stephen said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I remembered from his office visit. "I understand. You're hurt, but reading private communications out of context." "Out of context?" I laughed, and the sound was harder than anything I'd ever heard from myself. "Stephen, there's 18 months of context. Documented psychological manipulation, systematic exploitation of my trust and love, strategic planning to destroy my marriage, for your professional and personal benefit." I scrolled to another document on my phone. "Here's my favorite part, where you analyzed which of our mutual friends would be most likely to support Michelle's narrative. You even identified Emily as a potential liability who might complicate the transition." "That's my sister-in-law you're talking about, like a business obstacle." Michelle finally found her voice. "Daniel, please, you're making this sound so much worse than it was. Yes, Stephen and I developed feelings for each other, but..." "Developed feelings?" I stared at her in amazement. "Michelle, he documented your vulnerabilities like a predator studying prey. He kept notes on when you were most susceptible to manipulation. He researched our marriage, our finances, our social connections, and created a systematic plan to exploit everything I cared about." Stephen's mask was beginning to slip, revealing something colder underneath. "You're being dramatic, Daniel. Relationships end, people move on, making it into some kind of conspiracy. Theory doesn't change the fundamental fact that Michelle chose to be with me." "You're right," I said, and both of them looked surprised by my agreement. "Michelle did choose. She chose to participate in systematic psychological abuse against someone who loved her completely. She chose to use my romantic gestures as weapons against me. She chose to document our private life so you could use it for strategic advantage." I put my phone away and looked directly at Michelle. "But here's what I need you both to understand. You based your entire strategy on the assumption that I would remain the same trusting, accommodating man you'd been manipulating. You assumed I'd be too devastated to fight back effectively, too concerned with dignity to expose what you'd done." Michelle's voice was barely a whisper. "Daniel, you were wrong," I continued, "because the man you destroyed that night at the Sterling Heights isn't coming back. The man standing here now understands exactly what you are and what you've done. And he's not interested in your explanations, your justifications, or your attempts to minimize the damage." Stephen stepped forward, his voice hardening. "What exactly do you think you're going to do with this information?" "Justice, Stephen. Something you apparently don't understand. I looked at both of them. These two people who'd systematically dismantled my life while documenting every step. Victoria Chen sends her regards, by the way. She's been very helpful in understanding Meridian's policies about workplace relationships and professional misconduct. The effect was immediate. Stephen's face went ashen, and Michelle grabbed his arm. She also mentioned that the Morrison Industries client who felt uncomfortable with your obvious personal relationship during business meetings has been asking questions about company ethics policies. I continued. Funny how these things have a way of coming back around. You can't, Stephen started. Can't what? Tell the truth? Share documented evidence of professional misconduct with appropriate authorities? Ensure that people face consequences for their choices. I smiled, and it felt nothing like the accommodating expression I'd worn for 10 years of marriage. Stephen, you came to my office to threaten me into silence. You spread rumors about me being unstable. You systematically destroyed my marriage as part of a calculated strategy. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Michelle was crying now, but not the genuine tears I remembered from our early relationship. These were calculated tears, designed to evoke sympathy and deflect responsibility. Daniel, please, she said. I know we hurt you, but destroying our careers won't bring back our marriage. Can't we find a way to move forward without what? Without accountability? Without consequences? I stared at her. This woman, I'd loved for 11 years, who'd used that love as a tool to destroy me. Michelle, you stood in front of 43 people and announced that I was never enough for you. You planned that humiliation months in advance. You used my anniversary surprise as part of your exit strategy. I shook my head. There is no moving forward. There's only justice. And the beautiful thing about justice is that it doesn't require your permission or cooperation. Stephen tried one last approach. Daniel, be reasonable. Michelle made a mistake, but 18 months of systematic psychological manipulation isn't a mistake, Stephen. It's who you are, both of you. I looked between them one final time. You wanted me to understand that I wasn't enough for Michelle? Message received. But you're about to discover that the man you targeted for destruction is more than enough to ensure you face appropriate consequences for your choices. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Michelle? Emily wants me to tell you that she'll be my date for the divorce party. Apparently, she's very excited to celebrate my freedom from people who mistake cruelty for strength. As I walked away, I heard Michelle call my name one last time, her voice breaking with something that might have been genuine regret, but I didn't turn around. The old Daniel Thomas might have stopped, might have listened to her explanation, might have been moved by her tears, but that man was gone, destroyed by these two people's systematic cruelty. In his place walked someone who understood his own worth, someone who refused to be manipulated by people who confused love with weakness, someone who was finally ready to reclaim everything they'd tried to take from him. 6 months later, I stood in the ballroom of the Nob Hill Riverview, Portland's most exclusive venue, watching 200 guests celebrate the most talked-about divorce party in the city's social history. The space was elegant beyond anything Michelle and I had ever afforded together. Crystal chandeliers, panoramic views of the city skyline, and a full orchestra instead of a simple string quartet. You clean up nice for a divorced man, Emily said, adjusting my bow tie with the easy familiarity we'd developed over months of planning this evening. She looked stunning in a deep emerald dress that perfectly complemented her auburn hair, and the way she moved through the crowd with confidence and grace made it clear why several eligible men had already asked for her number. Have I mentioned lately that you're the best revenge partner a man could ask for? I replied, watching her laugh in a way that reminded me what genuine joy looked like. The guest list was a masterpiece of strategic social planning. Everyone who'd witnessed my humiliation at the anniversary dinner was here, plus dozens of Portland's social and business elite who'd heard about the spectacular downfall of Michelle Davis and Stephen Green. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd been dismissed as boring and not enough was throwing a party that had become the most coveted invitation in months. Daniel, Margaret Davidson approached with a champagne flute raised in toast. I have to say, in 20 years of divorce law, I've never seen assets divided so favorably for my client. When Michelle's professional misconduct came to light, it changed everything. The legal victory had been even more complete than I'd hoped. Victoria Chen's documentation had not only exposed the systematic nature of Michelle and Stephen's relationship, but it also revealed how they'd used company resources for personal gain. When Meridian's senior partners learned about the breach of professional ethics, they'd terminated Stephen immediately and flagged Michelle for investigation by the Oregon State Bar for her role in facilitating client relationship violations. Michelle's career in marketing was effectively over. The woman who'd built her identity around professional success and social status was now unemployable in her chosen field, facing potential legal action from former clients who felt misled about the nature of her relationship with Stephen. The house sale closed yesterday, Margaret continued. With Michelle's reduced earning potential and the documented timeline of her affair, the court awarded you a significantly larger portion of the marital assets. She'll be starting over financially while you're positioned for a very comfortable future. I nodded, but the financial victory felt secondary to something more important. For the first time in years, I woke up each morning excited about my life instead of anxious about managing someone else's emotions. There's someone I'd like you to meet, Emily said, returning with a distinguished woman in her 50s. Daniel. This is Catherine Holt, CEO of Sustainable Design Collective. She's been following your work on the eco-housing project. Mr. Thomas, Catherine said, extending her hand with the direct confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions. Quickly. I've been hoping to discuss a partnership opportunity. We're launching a West Coast initiative for sustainable urban development, and your reputation for both innovation and integrity makes you exactly the kind of architect we want to partner with. The professional opportunity was one of several that had emerged since word spread about my situation. Apparently, the business community had noticed how I'd handled the divorce proceedings with dignity and strategic intelligence. Instead of seeing me as the victim of a broken marriage, people saw someone who'd faced adversity and emerged stronger. I'd be honored to discuss it, I replied, though I should mention that any major projects would need to accommodate some upcoming travel plans. Emily smiled mysteriously. Daniel's been accepted into the International Sustainable Architecture Fellowship, 3 months in Copenhagen, studying Scandinavian approaches to green building design. The fellowship represented everything I'd dreamed about professionally but had never pursued because Michelle had wanted us to stay rooted in Portland for her career advancement. Now, with no one to accommodate except myself, I was finally free to chase opportunities that excited me. Ladies and gentlemen, the orchestra conductor announced, if I could have your attention for a special toast. The crowd gathered as I took the microphone, looking out over faces that had witnessed both my destruction and resurrection. My brother Jake stood with his wife, beaming with pride. Victoria Chen raised her glass from near the orchestra, her smile reflecting the satisfaction of justice well served. Even my parents, who'd initially encouraged me to work things out with Michelle, now looked at me with something approaching awe. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what my life looked like, I began, my voice carrying easily through the ballroom. I thought I knew who I was, what I wanted, and what I was worth. Then someone I trusted showed me exactly how wrong I was about all of those things. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. Tonight, I want to thank that person for the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, the gift of understanding my own value. I raised my champagne glass to second chances, to new beginnings, and to discovering that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing that could have happened. The toast was echoed by 200 voices, and as I looked around the ballroom, I realized something profound had occurred. The man who'd been publicly humiliated for being too ordinary was now surrounded by people who valued his character, his integrity, and his strength. The woman who dismissed him as boring was somewhere across town, probably wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Emily and I found ourselves alone on the venue's balcony, looking out over the city lights. "Any regrets?" she asked, her hand finding mine in the way that had become natural between us over the past months. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret the 10 years with Michelle? The naive trust that had made me vulnerable to manipulation? The pain of discovering that someone I loved had systematically betrayed me? None, I said finally. Every mistake led me here. Every moment of pain was necessary to become who I am now. Emily squeezed my hand. And who is that? I looked at her. This remarkable woman who'd chosen to stand with me when I had nothing left. who'd helped me plan the perfect revenge and then stayed to build something real. And smiled. Someone who knows exactly what he's worth, I said. And someone who won't settle for anything less than he deserves. The old Daniel Thomas had been destroyed at an anniversary dinner by people who confused his kindness for weakness. The man, standing on this balcony, understood that sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting what you want. It's discovering you wanted the wrong things all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.